Now, in the last week or so, there's been some unadulterated good news for the fight against disease in Africa. We heard the announcement of the world's first vaccine for malaria, as well as a new revolutionary life-changing treatment for those living with the sickle cell disease. There was also the news that one of the world's biggest biotechnology companies, Moderna, says it'll build a factory somewhere in Africa, location as yet unknown, to produce vaccines, including its COVID-19 jabs. But while we celebrate this watershed moment for African health, spare a moment to ask, why aren't African countries, led by the biggest of the lot, Nigeria, investing in scaling up research and addressing public health challenges facing the continent? Why are they not developing treatments for deadly diseases that are endemic to their continent and leaving it to someone else to do it for them? Why are they so far behind in strengthening their own critical health services? Well, for more on this, I'm joined now in the studio by the Director General and CEO of the Nigerian Institute for Pharmaceutical Research and Development, NIPRD, Dr. Obi Adigwe. Always a delight to see you.
Same here, Charles.
How are you?
Well, it's been a hectic 2 years, but rewarding because we've made quite some progress on different fronts.
And of course, when you met the NIPRD, it was arguably close to the bottom.
Well, I got
try and be polite, because I know that's what you're trying to be.
I got called out by two journalists who came 3 months after I was appointed Director General. I think they came in December of 2018. And the word that they used to describe the institute was moribund. I corrected them because, you know, there are two broad components to research and development efforts: the infrastructure, which includes equipment, your buildings, your power supply, and then the human capital. You know, and in terms of infrastructure, at that time, you know, they were absolutely correct. I sent you.
Yes, I saw the pictures.
I sent you a clip.
Quite shocking, really.
Shocking. We had close to half of my buildings were dilapidated. There were buildings where we had holes in the roof, you know, and some of my staff were threatened on a daily basis by rodents and reptiles. And then we had a big paucity of equipment, you know. In terms of human capacity, at that point in time, we had world-class scientists. As you're aware, I took my master's and my PhD in Scotland and England, respectively, and we had same standard of research at that time. So I corrected the journalist. I told them that in terms of human capital, we had world standard, and we had demonstrated it. We had, you know, gained our ISO certifications. We had won Center of Excellence time and time again. We had been first to develop phytomedicines to phase 2 clinical trials, and quite a number of achievements.
Yeah, but it's that case of one step forward, 2 steps backward, isn't it? Because, I mean, this was at the high point of the NIPRD, and then by the time you got there, it was at its low point.
Well, I would argue that where we are now is NIPRD's highest point, because with the intervention from the government, all those buildings you saw have been renovated. So I have 0 dilapidated buildings in the institute. We've gotten close to 100 new pieces of equipment, world class, in the past 18 months. And we've even increased the capacity of the already world-class scientists that I mentioned, and the results are out there. You know, the groundbreaking work we did on the COVID organics, it went viral in English and in French. The work we did on phytomedicines verification and validation, the artificial intelligence modeling we used to predict that Andrographis paniculata could have an effect on COVID-19 even before colleagues in Thailand picked up on it. And just to give you an inkling as to the output within that period, when I was appointed Director General, that period you were talking about, there was 0 institutionally funded products. As I speak to you, we have from 0, we have 5 which are listed by the regulatory agency and are in the market, and we have about 20 to 30 more in development. And these are just products. I've not talked about processes. So,
but what I need to get to, I mean, I appreciate the point you're making, and clearly it sounds like you're making considerable strides, and measured from the time that you actually came in and what you found there and how you've moved forward since then. But that doesn't appear to be enough, because, I mean, we've got a COVID crisis on our hands, and we're not hearing about these treatments and these medicines being applied in a way that attracts not only national but global attention and tells us that Africa is there, Nigeria is there at the forefront of that fight against the pandemic. What we're seeing is Nigeria struggling to get a piece of the action from the vaccine manufacturers internationally, and that appears to be the central focus. Is it bad PR on your part, or is it simply that what you've done so far has not really measured up?
Well, it's surprising you would mention that, this isn't being heard of. The work we did on the COVID organics preparation, like I mentioned, and you can verify, have your people verify.
I don't doubt you.
Yeah, I mean, viewers can verify. I'm in the business of evidence, and it's always good that scientists are skeptics. People need to verify what public officials and scientists tell them. Our work on the COVID organics preparation was the first in the world, and there is categorical evidence that 54 countries across Africa made both scientific and policy decisions based on the findings of the work that came out
so you made that available to us?
Oh yes,
right.
We sent in a report which was announced by the Minister of Health and followed up by the SGF, who was the chairman of the PTF, and we had follow-up, interest. We had people from Belgium, from France, from Central African Republic. There were people calling to interview us in French, and I was challenged. My primary school French, which has was put to the test. But this went viral in both English and in French, and that's an indication of the kind of work that we can do if we get the right support.
Okay. Well,
however,
sure.
Charles, there is a bit of the PR aspect to it, because the drug you mentioned in the intro, crizanlizumab, the product for sickle cell anemia, has the very same therapeutic output as this product, which was developed from nitrate, from 4 plants, and has been in the market for 2 decades. You know what it means for a drug to be in the market, to be used in over 40 countries? But one thing I've realized, and like you rightly said, is the PR. When I wanted to do my master's degree in the UK, and the guys from East London, University of East London, came down to Nigeria and they razzle-dazzled us. And I went there to see that university wasn't what I thought it was. I got a big realization. The people in the West know how to play global politics, and they also know how to package things, as they say. We're still learning, because like I mentioned, this particular drug, same therapeutic outcomes, slightly different mechanism of action, but you don't hear people talking about Niclovix the same way that they're talking about crizanlizumab.
Well, I mean, I don't know who to blame for that, because the bottom line is simply this. If you've got a medicine that deals with sickle cell in a world in which sickle cell is endemic, I mean, it's a big problem in Africa and people of African origin, then I would think that you would be selling that drug quite effectively to try, because I mean the point of manufacturing it is to try and deal with the disease and the problem. The other thing, of course, is that we're hearing of the development of a vaccine for malaria, for example, which has been a problem for Africa. I mean, thousands of people dying annually from it. What are the inhibiting factors that prevent an agency such as yours, NIPRD, beyond the things that you have talked about, from either manufacturing such vaccines and drugs or going into partnership with private firms and so on to make those drugs?
So we are a research and development.
I may have to interrupt you because we've got a minute, but go on.
We're a research and development agency, and it's not our job to manufacture vaccines.
But you do
now,
the research.
We do the research,
right.
We provide the policy environment. So there's a value chain. First thing that needs to be done is to have a policy framework that encourages research and development for vaccines. Second thing that needs to be done is to develop a milieu that enables scientists within that policy framework come up with candidate vaccines. And then from there, you can now talk about partnership with companies or technical partners abroad to actually manufacture and
But I mean, you've been
vaccine.
around since the 1980s. I mean, there's been malaria for as long as one can remember.
Absolutely.
Why isn't that environment ready to deal with?
Absolutely. Unfortunately, I haven't been DG of NIPRD since the 80s.
That's a good
I've been
point.
there for just 3 years.
That's a good point. And on that note, let me take a break. We'll continue talking in a minute. You're watching the Arise interview. Plenty more still ahead as we continue our chat with the Director General of the Nigerian Institute for Pharmaceutical Research and Development, Dr. Obi Adigwe. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Arise interview. I'm Charles Aniagolu. Now, my first guest today is the Director General and CEO of the Nigerian Institute for Pharmaceutical Research and Development, Dr. Obi Adigwe. He and his agency are tasked with the research and development of drugs and pharmaceutical products in a world in which tens of thousands die each year from malaria and other diseases and illnesses. These diseases can be prevented or treated with timely access to appropriate and affordable medicines, vaccines, and other health services. But less than 2% of drugs consumed in Africa are produced on the continent, meaning that many sick patients do not have access to locally produced drugs and may not afford to buy the imported ones. Why is Africa, with 54 countries, so hugely challenged when tiny Cuba, a country facing crippling sanctions, has become a world leader in the manufacture of medicines and in research and development? And Dr. Obi Adigwe, Director General of the Nigerian Institute for Pharmaceutical Research and Development, is still with me in the studio. Thank you for staying with us. The World Health Organization has cited several factors that it says inhibit access to research and development medicines in Africa. Well, the major one, it says, are the shortage of resources and the lack of skilled personnel. You've said that you have skilled personnel. Do you agree with their assessment?
Well, let me just finish the question that you were on before we went on the break. So in that entire milieu, if you go back to the interview I gave to the Guardian newspapers on the 30th of April 2017, we began to call out for local manufacturing of vaccines. And this was even before anybody knew what COVID was. Thankfully, the government listened and began a partnership with a private company called BioVaccines. And that's why we're not, as a country, starting from ground zero. Some progress has been made. And when the entities are going to be chosen in terms of partnership for COVID vaccines, Nigeria obviously will be out there because of the work we started to do in 2017. But I agree with you, it's not enough, and we're working night and day to make sure that we catch up with our peers.
Right. So what is the current level of pharmaceutical production in Nigeria today, for instance?
So pharmaceutical production in Nigeria is actually more advanced than in many other African countries. As I speak to you, Nigeria has about 160 companies who manufacture medicines locally in Nigeria. And if you're looking at the entire West Africa, that's 15 countries and about 350 million people. About 60% of the manufacturing capacity exists in Nigeria. That's of the whole region. But you know, we don't look at other countries when we're judging our potential, because in terms of human capacity, in terms of population, in terms of phytomedicinal potential, we should be standing out and competing with India, China, and Europe, not with other African countries. And that's how we are looking at it. And so, whilst some other countries have 100% importation, some 10% importation, in Nigeria is somewhere between 60 and 70% importation.
It's about 70%.
With the rest being manufactured locally.
Right.
But certain steps have been taken, like I mentioned, policy-wise, and we're now getting to the implementation.
Right, but let me ask you this. How is it, because whilst we were on break, you mentioned Cuba.
Yeah.
How is it that Cuba, a small, impecunious Caribbean country, under crushing U.S. sanctions, can steal a march on all the countries in Africa, including Nigeria, and develop not only a COVID vaccine, but radically alter medical research by developing other groundbreaking world-class medicines and treatments, and carrying out this phenomenal research that is praised all over the world?
Well, Cuba hasn't stolen a march only on Africa and Nigeria. They've stolen a march even on the US.
Yeah, but we're talking about Africa.
If you look at but you need to put it in stark comparison, because if you look at health indices and they're comparing the amount of money put into healthcare and the output in terms of life expectancy, the Cubans are better than the Americans, and the Americans spend 20-30 times the amount that the Cubans spent. In the interest of time, let me tell you what makes Cuba successful in those areas. Two things, two broad areas. One, necessity being the mother of invention, because they were blockaded, as you're aware, in the late 60s based on the Cuban Missile Crisis, and they had to learn from there. Second, focused leadership and long-term planning. So the output you're seeing today wasn't done in 5 years or 10 years. Is the output of 3 to 5 decades of planning into biotechnology, preventative medicine,
so consistency,
training,
basically.
Consistency.
Right.
And that's what we have been preaching here. If you look at the evidence in this sector for close to a decade, myself and my contemporaries have been preaching medicine security.
It must be very frustrating for you.
Well, it used to be, but it has suddenly become very rewarding. Did you listen to the 1st October speech, the president's speech, where he mentioned from paragraph 13 to paragraph 17 that Nigeria needs to focus on research and development, and now needs to assure that we begin the first step towards pharmaceutical independence.
Yeah, but do you have the capacity to, I mean, is there the policy environment that allows you to go in and work with other people in other countries without depending on the bureaucracies of government and all the rest of it, and just move very quickly and get out there, get into partnership with people for research, development, that kind of thing? Private sector, other governments, other institutions around the world.
Absolutely. And that is the reason why agencies were created outside ministries, to make us more nimble in terms of engagement. And we have utilized that, creation, that those criteria that necessitated our creation. So we were one of the first during COVID to secure funding from ECOWAS with respect to developing a phytomedicine for COVID-19. Very recently, one of the most highly regarded fiscal institutions in the world has demonstrated interest in funding the institute with close to $1 million for API production that will not only spur Nigeria's medicine security, but the whole of Africa. And there are many more areas where we're making such interventions.
We've got about a minute.
It isn't a carte blanche. No, I'm still a government agency, so I still need certain...
Of course. I mean, there are limitations.
Absolutely.
We've got less than a minute. How much would you say the reality of COVID has woken up the policymakers in this country, and have things now started to change?
I think... you know, the speech that was given, the prioritization by the National Assembly, which has translated to equipment in my institute, the open door access we have to the highest policymakers in the land has woken everybody up.
Okay.
People who haven't woken up yet and who need to wake up are those in the development sector, the philanthropists who are waiting to still get, you know, some sort of blessing from above before engaging with NIPRID and other scientific
Dr. Obi Adigwe, Director General of the Nigerian Institute for Pharmaceutical Research and Development. Always a pleasure to talk with you. Thank you very much indeed.